And we're live. Thank you, everybody, for joining. Interesting. The live did not go through to Twitter, aka X. Why is that? Never occurred. Huh. Fuck Twitter, honestly. This is the first stream I've ever done starting at 10 p.m., at least 10 p.m. in the time zone that I'm currently in Israel. So consider this a late night show. Will this change anything? Probably not, but I guess it's a justification to be a little bit more edgy, right? The kids are asleep. It's 10 p.m. Do you know where your children are? So, what are we going to talk about today? So, first of all, this stream is going to be a little bit different. We're going to do an hour, and then we're going to end it and go over to the head on Discord. We have Peter Beinart joining us for a conversation. So, we're not going to do a usual stream after party. It'll be live stream, and then we'll take it over to the conversation with Peter. We only have him for 30 minutes, so it'll be part interview, part Q&A. So there will be opportunity for community members to ask questions and interact with him. So I hope you join. I'll drop a link to that. Well, you can see a link to that in the description already. Interesting that it won't go live to Twitter. Am I getting old that I refuse to call it X? A premium account on X is required to create. I do have premium. Interesting. Whatever. Honestly, fuck Elon Musk. He used to be one of the people that I respected the most in this world. And when I just look at his like technological innovation, he's still someone I respect tremendously. And he really stands in a league of his own in his ability to innovate. But when it comes to his political commentary and just what he represents now, I mean, it's just it's hard to have respect for the guy. He's really become one of the greatest, the number one propagators of misinformation. He has zero interest in what's true or not. He instead of buying Twitter and turning it into something for all people, he went full MAGA, makes zero effort to be objective, doesn't try to be a bridge builder or a peacemaker. He missed a very good opportunity. I wish him success on his other ventures, but I'm not rooting for him on the political front, with a caveat, because I do think there's potential for Doge. I do think government is highly inefficient, and if he could do something about it, great. That would be cool. But I just don't trust that he even knows. Like, he knows how to run a business. He knows how to make businesses more efficient. So there's something there. But like, he doesn't seem to have a good grasp of the world and of politics and how to work within the current system he's in. We still don't know all the repercussions of the major cuts he's doing. It's possible in the big picture will be net positive. Like, I'm open to that idea, but why do you got to spread all this misinformation? Why do you need to be an agent of division? Also, he promotes all these white supremacist accounts. So, anywho, no one's perfect. Let's get to the topic at hand. Gaza. Protests have erupted all throughout Gaza. What does this mean? It's unclear, honestly, but I would say this does significantly increase the chance of Hamas being removed from power. Right? I've held for a long time that the chance of defeating them militarily is low. But the chance of them being removed from power by their own people, I believe to be much higher. And the reason is simple. When you have a resistance group that is representative of the people, they're supported by the people, it's very hard to defeat them. They have an endless supply of new recruits, which currently is the case for Hamas, right? They have similar numbers to what they had on October 7th. But if they lose support, it changes the paradigm. It means there's immense pressure from both sides. Now, what is interesting is that if they do get removed from power as a result of popular uprising, there's a strong case to be made that Israel's aggression contributed to that happening. And this will then be used as a justification for that aggression, therefore being legitimate. And this is really a challenge that peacemakers face, those who oppose violence face. History is filled with violent conflict seemingly solving problems. And that's true. The thing is, though, violence is almost never the only or best option. It's an option, it's the one that generally comes most natural to us. So we have many, many examples of it being effective. And this only is then used for the current and future generations to justify the violence they want to engage in. Right? And why does it come natural? You need to think, like, for most of our existence, the only, we survived as Homo sapiens. We were one of many hominids. Whatever, I don't want to get too much into evolution, but essentially violence is a very, very, very much a part of our past. If you look at ancient hunter-gatherers, specifically Homo sapiens, as well as Neanderthals, a significant amount of the dead ones that we found have battle scars, right? They were killed violently. Now you need to think, and it's not that there wasn't any cooperation. We do have evidence. We found archaeological evidence of cooperation and whatnot. But it's very hard to communicate and negotiate with someone when you don't speak the same language. And if you're not going to be aggressive, you're likely to be destroyed, right? So this whole idea of don't communicate, strike hard, strike first, was very much a winning strategy for most of our existence. Now we live in a world where we have the capacity to communicate regardless of any language barrier. So the same strategy that kept us alive today not only is not necessary, very well may be a strategy that can kill us. But there's no denying that the history is filled with examples of violence solving problems. So if Hamas is now defeated as a result of uprising, those who have supported Israel's aggression along the way will see, you see, it worked, it was worth it. But we still need to resist that for a very clear reason. You're violating human rights and committing war crimes are not then okay if you can point to it having a positive outcome. Like, that's just not how we should look at morality and ethics and how we should structure international law. Because there's no guarantee at what the end result will be. And B, I mean, this is, I guess, a philosophical argument, which would be like deontology versus consequentialism, which I don't want to get deep into, but I think it's a very dangerous world we're living in if you can justify violating somebody's human rights and committing war crimes if you can maybe have a potential positive outcome, right? And also, for every instance where we pointed to violence solving a problem, I'm sure we could come up with many other alternatives that were not violent that could have solved that problem, right? Now, I don't know if this is a conversation we're going to have because I don't know. I still don't know how to predict the likelihood of Hamas stepping down, but it's certainly higher now with popular uprising within Gaza. And so we need to be able to hold two truths now, that it would be good if Hamas is defeated. That would be good for Palestinians. That would be good for Israelis. But we also need to recognize that if they are defeated, then this will be used to justify further Israeli aggression, and it will be used to justify aggression in the future from other parties. They'll say, you see, look what Israel did. It helped defeat Hamas. So we would need to hold these two truths, that We should still want them to be defeated, but recognize the consequence of that. And it will be our work to do to continue to speak out against violent aggression and human rights violations. And I think probably what the way to fight back is to focus more on solutions, right? What is a viable solution? What's a viable alternative to our current approach? And this is something that I've reflected on in the work that I do. I've always liked people like Noam Chomsky and Norman Finkelstein. Not that I agree with everything they say, but I just appreciated that their intellect, that they're kind of shameless, that they're fighting against they're fighting what you could call the good fight. But my critique of them has always been they're good at identifying the problem, but very rarely talk about solutions. And then I looked in the mirror and understood that I am turning into that person myself. I have spoken a lot more about the war crimes Israel is committing. I've been very harsh in my critique of Israel, which I think is legitimate and necessary. But I've understood that should come with a greater balance of talking about potential solutions. Now, the challenge, and I understand this is why Noam Chomsky and Norman Finkelstein and many others don't do solutions more than they do problems, is because problems are easy to identify. You don't need to get up off your couch, metaphorically speaking, because you don't need to get up off your couch to come up with solutions either. But they're so much harder to figure out. So I made a commitment that I'm going to start focusing more on presenting different solutions, different alternatives. And, those who have been watching these streams for a while know that I do that, but not to the same extent that I critique. So I'm going to strive to find a better balance. This is interesting. Excuse all that brown stuff. I drink different powders and stuff, and I had like this mushroom powder with different functional mushrooms in it, and now I'm drinking like electrolyte creatine water. Keeps me jacked. Anyways, what else regarding Gaza? I think I had one or two other points. Oh, yeah. Now, another reason why defeating resistance groups militarily often doesn't work is because they come back in a different form. Right? Because people don't just give up fighting for their rights. If there's rights that aren't met and they organize militarily, you can defeat the military, but can you defeat the people who desire those rights? So the fact that let's say Gazans topple Hamas, that's not going to change Gazans' desire to find a just solution to the conflict. It is possible, perhaps even probable, that a new entity in Gaza will be less maximalist in its approach to Israel-Palestine, so resolving a conflict will be easier. Sure. But we need to be honest about the fact that Hamas is not the problem here, because we didn't have Hamas before 1988, but we had decades of bloodshed prior. And Hamas is not in power in the West Bank, but it's not like that the situation in the West Bank is great. So whether Hamas stays or leaves is yet to be determined. But regardless of what happens, we need to remain determined to finding a real solution to this, because the status quo currently will always produce more violence. And for those who don't want to see more violence on the land, and I hope that's all of us, we should understand that. And what's interesting, we're seeing a major copium from both the Kahanist types and the Hamas lovers. They're both struggling with these protests, right? The Kahanist types, for them, they're struggling to come to terms with the fact that Palestinians are not a monolith and they're not all Hamas. And the Hamas lovers, they're struggling to accept that those who are ruled by Hamas don't view them as noble liberators the same way they do. So it's interesting how the extremes on both sides are horseshoeing it yet again, struggling to come to terms with reality. But hey, here we are. Here we are. We'll do a little Q&A. And you know what? If someone wants to hop on to talk, I'll drop a link just in case. We could turn this into a call-in show. So let me know where you're tuning in from. There's also all these deportations. So let's talk a little bit about the deportations in the U.S. All right, I haven't prepared notes on this topic, but just some thoughts. You can make the case, like when it comes to the deportations, I think there's an argument to be had of, is this a violation of First Amendment rights? And that debate really comes down to, are these rights extended to green card and visa holders, right? So far, citizens are not being rounded up and punished for their views. It's starting with visa and green card holders. Now, I have heard people make the case that these rights are inalienable, so they're not connected to whether you're a green card holder or visa holder. And I've heard people make a case that, look, I don't have much sympathy for foreigners coming and engaging in protest. That's not what they're here to come. Like these are the arguments going back and forth. My position is that it certainly seems like a very bad precedent. These people aren't engaging in terrorist activity. They're simply supporting Palestinian rights. Is it possible some are sympathetic to Hamas? Sure. But again, is that enough of a violation that you get deported? To me, it just seems like a slippery slope and a very bad precedent. But that's almost like besides the fact. I think there's a more important issue. What is the impact of these deportations? So right now, Trump administration is essentially weaponizing accusations of anti-Semitism to erode freedom of speech. I don't think this is a policy that helps Jews, but it seems to be a policy that will only further fuel anti-Semitism. Right? Trump ran on the idea of America first. And in many regards, he is keeping that promise, right? By deporting, I almost made up a word. By deporting undocumented immigrants, by cutting off funding to Ukraine, by letting Doge do what it wants to do, right? These are all promises that he made and he's kept. But then when it comes, and again, I'm not currently not making a value judgment on how I feel about those things. It's just in that regard, he's keeping his word. But then when it comes to the Jews and Israel, it's almost like we fall into this special protected category. And I can understand why Jews feel good about being in this protected category, quote unquote, but there's no way that is good for a relationship with the rest of the American citizens. People innately don't like those who get special treatment. It only further reinforces this idea that America is bought and paid for by Jews and Israel. Is it making Jews safer? Hard to see that. Hard to see the case. And also, I think, it's only fueling the Palestinian cause. Mahmoud Khalil was not well known prior to him getting arrested. He's now been made a martyr. These deportations are only fueling support for Palestine and for Palestinian rights. Which again, so perhaps perhaps Trump deporting these people will be net positive for Palestinian rights. But I know that's not his intention. So it seems like a very short-sighted and counterproductive, at least for what his goals are. Let's see. We got some comments coming in. SRG goes, they have a toxic symbiotic relationship. That's to the extremists on both sides. Yes, I agree. Nahum goes, hello from Boston. Hello. Poppy goes, there's another framing on the pro-Israel side that I really dislike. Look, the bombing has worked. The Gazans have finally understood that they go against Hamas if they want to live. Correct. This is, I don't know when you tuned in, but that was one of the points I made, that one of the challenges, one of the downsides with the protests is it just further justifies aggression. So I do agree with you. Poppy continues and says, this idea that Arabs only understand force and that Palestinians in Gaza are only protesting because Israel is completely destroying them. Yeah. Now, here's another thing where I think many people don't actually, those who say you don't understand how the Middle East works, you don't understand Arabs, they only understand force. People who say this, they understand Arabs the least. What Arabs understand is respect and honor, not force. Has force played a role in tribal communities figuring out a way how to live side by side with each other for thousands of years? Sure. But these are cultures rooted in respect and honor. And the same people calling for force give zero regard for their honor. And in fact, dishonor them, support policies that humiliate and dishonor them daily. So when somebody says you don't understand Arabs, XYZ, major red flag, they most likely are projecting and they don't have a good understanding themselves. Yeah, Poppy continues to say, on repression of speech, I completely agree. Jews will be seen as benefactors of this policy and will be blamed for the erosion of democratic values. Exactly. I don't see any way how this is going to be beneficial to Jews. And also Trump weaponizing shalom, like going shalom, shalom Mahmoud, like bro, don't weaponize our one of the best words in the Hebrew language. Shalom. We could all hope for shalom. But now if he stops doing it, then all good. But if he continues to do it, it will forever be seen as part of MAGA movement. Shalom is a dog whistle for MAGA. And maybe that's a stretch, but it's certainly tainting the pureness of the word. So Danny Esch is saying something interesting. And Danny, I will get back to your email. I'm slow on emails, but it's on my mind. So give me a few more days. It seems that a major part of the protest is against Israel genocide and is being mislabeled by the media. So I have heard this claim being made. I don't have feet on the ground, so I don't really know if that's true. But if you have a reporter or a journalist making such claims, let me know. I'm seeing this reported by people on the ground as well as some Palestinian activists like Ihab and Khalil. They're not making that claim, but I have heard that. I have heard that. Nahum goes, I know a Russian student who dodged the Ukraine war, drafted and managed to get Israeli citizenship. Now in Boston, he's afraid of being deported back to Israel for being an anti-Zionist. It's absurd. Well, that would be pretty crazy, getting deported from the US to Israel for anti-Zionist views. He might fall into that protected status and they won't touch him, but that would be interesting. Poppy goes, yes, one of the many complaints I hear from Palestinians is their sense of humiliation, that they're constantly disregarded and disrespected by soldiers and Israelis in general. Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's daily. It's daily. We get, like, imagine you're just trying to live your life in the West Bank. and some settlers come and start abusing you. They're harassing you and your family. There's literally nothing you could do. If you are violent towards them, you'll be charged as a terrorist. If you survive, there's a good chance you'll be killed. If not, you'll be jailed. You could go to the Palestinian Authority. They can't do anything to them. You could report it to Israel. Nothing will happen. So we literally have a dynamic where there's gangs of settlers running around harassing Palestinians, and there's nothing they can do about it. Absolutely nothing. Imagine how radicalizing that is. Danny says Muhammad Shahida wrote about it, meaning about the protests being anti-genocide protests. So I don't really trust Muhammad's work, if I'm to be completely honest with you. And I let me try to pull up I think he might have even deleted that one. Now, because I don't fully trust him doesn't mean he can't be right. Like, let's be clear about that. But he's like he's not what I call one of the more objective reporters. Where do I find his account? I know Ihab Hassan, who I really like. Been trying to get him on the channel. Y'all should follow Ihab if you don't know him. Let's see. He does great coverage. He's very anti-Hamas, calling out the settlers. He takes a good balanced approach. Let's see if I could find it. That's the thing with people who tweet so much. It's hard to find their... Oh, yeah, here it is. Okay. So, yeah, so Ihab goes... Let me screen share this. So he's retweeting Muhammad Shahida's post. He goes, after being called out for his lies and hypocrisy, Muhammad Shahida deleted the post, but here's a screenshot and here's my response. Muhammad finally woke up after 2 days of silence on the anti-Hamas protests in Gaza, only to tell us that Palestinians can't get rid of Hamas under airstrikes and have to wait for a ceasefire. Let's take a look at what Hamas did during the last ceasefire. They arrested, tortured, killed anyone who dared to speak out. So yeah, I don't know if this is what you're referring to, Danny, but we should try to get further confirmation on that. Or better yet, we get them both here for a stream. Okay. Well, I'm back. So months ago, I spilled coffee on my laptop, got it fixed. They said it's all good. Now we have a situation where, like, twice a day, it'll just shut down, and it has never happened on stream. And I knew it's just a matter of time before it happens on stream. And here we go. So whoever's watching this live, congrats! You finally got to witness the shutdown of my stream. But good to see y'all still here. Anyways, where were we? Okay, let's get back to some Q&A. So Floodland is further supporting what Danny is saying. I heard all the signs the protesters are holding say nothing about Hamas. As I don't read Arabic, I'm not sure. Let's see. SRG goes, Loanerbox has been translating them the past few days, going through many of the videos that are being posted online, and all of them are vehemently anti-Hamas. Okay. So Loanerbox is reviewing them, and they are anti-Hamas. I think we've seen enough to know that there's certain, at least some of these protests are anti-Hamas. Is it possible there's a broader protest going on? Possible, but I think we, at this point, we need to acknowledge that a significant amount of energy behind these protests is calling out Hamas. Noam Sain, welcome to the chat. Cool. LES Tigos can confirm as an Arabic speaker that they're explicitly anti-Hamas. Okay, that all lines up. Well, great. Let's see what comes of it, you know? Yeah, I mean, the last thing the people of Gaza deserve is more violence now between them and Hamas. And they're, for the most part, unarmed. So there's definitely it's definitely not going to be easy to uproot them, but potentially with enough pressure from the international community as well as their own people, it's possible that enough pressure can cause them to step down. I could see that. Did you all see? Also, I'll drop a link if anybody wants to join the stream. Also, if anyone wants to hit us with a super chat, we'll prioritize that. Why is it not pasting? Anyways, yesterday, the Gaza Ministry of Health released a new list. And what was interesting was the reaction. I can't post the link now for whatever reason. It's not working. But so yesterday, the MOH, the Gaza Ministry of Health, released a new list. And what was interesting was seeing the reaction. So an Israeli did an analysis on the data, acknowledging that the data could be believed, which is, it's not really a change in Israeli society, right? Israel does not deny the numbers released by the MOH, and that's for obvious reason. They could verify the numbers. So what's interesting is all these like articles, think tanks, bullshit propaganda that we've been debunking here on this channel and on my own personal Twitter account. Israel themselves are not making the claims these people are making, because Israel can confirm them. So all these like reports casting doubt on the legitimacy of the data coming out of Gaza, it was all a sham, right? It was all a sham. We've known this. But so yesterday, an Israeli acknowledged it, which again is not new in Israeli society. It's new in the Western Zionist community. They're the ones kind of holding on to this thing that the numbers are all made up. And, you know, shout out to people like John Spencer and Andrew Fox, chief propagandists who have put these claims out to the world. They have literally used their platforms to lie to the people. And we see an impact on their misinformation campaigns. They should not be forgotten for their negative contribution to society. Now, once the analysis this guy did said the numbers are legit, but based on these numbers, we see that there's an excess of men being killed. And if you look at the excess of men and boys, he did include 14, 15, and 16, 14 to 17-year-old boys in the excess. And based on that, he reached the number 16,000. There's an excess of 16,000 males on the list. He then concluded, based on that, we could say, which is a third of the list, that a third are combatants. Now, this is a shift in, they used to say the civilian to combatant ratio is 1-to-1. He's now coming out with a big claim that it's actually 2-to-1, 2 civilians for each combatant. Well, many pro-Israel accounts took this analysis and translated it. So it was really a shift in the argument from denying the data to accepting it, but then misinterpreting it with this 2-to-1 civilian to combatant ratio. Now, why do they misinterpret it? Because in virtually all violent conflict, males die at a higher rate across the board. Why is this? They're more confused. They're more likely to be confused to be combatants, and they're more likely to take risks like getting food, water, and aid. They're also maybe more likely to defy evacuation orders. We see, and we see this very clearly in the data. 10-year-olds in Gaza, 10-year-old boys are more likely to be killed than 10-year-old girls. 11-year-old boys are more likely to be killed than 11-year-old girls. If we want to look at the elderly, 65 plus, men 65 plus, and again, men 65 plus are very unlikely to be combatants, are dying at a rate of 50% higher than women of that age. So the people finally acknowledge that the data is real, they just analyzed it incorrectly. When you take into account that men are dying at a higher rate, or males are dying at a higher rate, right, including boys, then this whole 2-to-1 civilian to combatant ratio makes no sense whatsoever. In reality, I think a safe estimate is 5 civilians to every 1 combatant, but it could even be as high as 9-to-1, which is the highest in the 21st century. Let's be clear about that. And this goes to another piece of misinformation that John Spencer used to love to share, but he stopped sharing it because I think he knows now that it's false. They used to say that civilian combatant ratio in other urban warfare conflicts is 9-to-1, but there's no basis for that. There hasn't been any conflict with that ratio, unless you're talking about like a genocide, like Rwanda. You have numbers like that, but not in what we describe as war. And so I would say what Israel's done is do we want to get into the genocide conversation? I don't object at all to the term genocide. I read what Human Rights Watch and Amnesty wrote about it. I think it does fit the definition. I generally don't use it just because I'm trying to reach a broad appeal. And I know many Israelis and Israel supporters are instantly turned off when they hear that term. So I use terminology like destruction of Gaza, war crimes. I think it's just a little bit more palatable, let's call it. But I think what we've done in Gaza, even in terms of the numbers, it doesn't reflect a genocide in the sense of like Rwanda. It doesn't at all. But it certainly doesn't reflect the numbers like a war. It's somewhere in between. So there has been a shift in the narrative. They're finally accepting the numbers. They're currently misinterpreting it. But, I put out an analysis countering this. Hopefully some more people are informed. And I saw some guys still push the 9-to-1 ratio. We need to get rid of that idea because it's just, there's no basis. When you look at the data from urban warfare, the past few conflicts, it's actually closer to 1-to-1. 1-to-1 is anywhere from 1-to-1 to 2-to-1, depending on which conflict. That's the range of urban warfare. Gaza is just significantly higher than that. Now, what the data we have, we can actually assume, we can conclude with a high degree of certainty that is around 90% civilians. The reason we still can't say that the civilian combatant ratio is 9-to-1 is because there's many unaccounted for, and we don't know if combatants aren't being added to the list to the same extent, at the same rate of civilians being added to the list. So there could be more. Let's say there's 10,000 people missing. It's possible that even if half of them are combatants, that will change the data. But maybe 7,000, 70% of them are combatants, that'll change the data. So until we have a full accounting of everybody, we won't know the exact civilian to combatant ratio. But based on the list, 90% civilians is a very fair estimate, and that's just by looking at the differential between men and women, and elderly and boys. If we assume that civilian men are dying at a rate of 2x civilian women, then 90% of the list is civilians. If you want to say they're not dying at 2x but at 1.5x, then something like 80-something% of the list are civilians. That's just how the math works out. Let's see. No, I'm saying says Hamas stepping down. You can see that. I'm not going to say that I think that there's a high likelihood, but I've held for very long that the chance of them being defeated militarily is very low. So what I'm describing now is with pressure from within, the chance of that happening increases significantly. Would I say it's likely? I'm not. I can't say I'm hopeful. I can't say it's likely, but it's certainly much more likely with these circumstances than just military pressure. Um, Now, what I will add, I think the chance of them stepping down increases if Israel too will make a concession, right? It would be easier for them to leave if they can leave essentially with some victory for their people, not just leave with 50,000 plus dead and them leaving power, but recognition of a Palestinian state, some concession from the Israeli side. Like if we care about, if Netanyahu cared about them stepping down more than he cared about his own image and his own power, then I think that he would fully recognize the importance of such a concession. But such a concession would look very weak in the eyes of the Israeli public, making it very unlikely. But I do think that would significantly increase the chance of them stepping down. SRG goes, I've noticed that some on the pro-Palestine side have been suppressing or censoring the protests outright. There's no mention of it on Our Palestine, and Ali Abu Minama called it astroturfing. Yeah, I think this comes, as I mentioned earlier, from the idea that I think there's two things at play. One, you just don't want, many people believe Hamas are these virtuous freedom fighters, and it just doesn't fit your worldview that their own people are protesting them. And the other is you just don't want Israel to win. You don't want them to be able to justify the aggression in Gaza. And if Hamas steps down, that will help justify the aggression. So I could see those two playing into why many in the pro-Palestine side are not happy with these protests. If somebody has another reason or idea, happy to hear your thoughts on that. And yeah, SRG continues and says Al Jazeera, Mideast Eye, TRT barely mentioned them. Yep, that's true. Adar, Noam Sain says, Adar, can you explain this? Numbers with don't mention how many combatants have been killed. Yeah, so did I clarify already? Because I see you sent this a few minutes ago. Did I clarify, or is there something more you'd like clarity on? Poppy says also a lot of paramedics are overwhelmingly men. Ah, that's interesting. That's true. The people going out to clear rubble are men, and that would increase men dying. Yep, that's true. That's another data point. We do hear, no, I'm trying to understand what you're saying. We do hear people screaming that more women and children are killed, though. I've not seen the numbers. 9-1 is same as Iraq. No, Iraq wasn't 9-1. Iraq, well, first of all, Iraq, a significant amount of the deaths, I don't remember how many, but it could be up to half were indirect deaths over a 10-year span as from the collapse of their healthcare system. So that's going to impact civilians overwhelmingly, right? But even in Iraq, it's like 4-1. And Iraq was devastating. It wasn't run properly. There were an abundance of war crimes, and the civilian combatant ratio in Gaza is almost certainly worse than Iraq. No, you're asking where my expertise is derived from. Well, everything I'm saying is publicly available information. It's just this has been something that I've researched pretty extensively um, since shortly after October 7th. In fact, it's probably the main area that I've looked into. Gaza death toll, Ministry of Health. Um, it's not all like I can't send you one article that will sum up everything I'm saying. That doesn't exist. But there's different bits and pieces of information that you can pick up on. And then I've written analyses on this primarily on Twitter that I could send you if you want to see, which kind of sums up a lot of this information. Noam goes, somehow you manage over and over again to make assertions that I never read or hear. Yeah, I would say that's a problem in the information that is out there, or information that you're consuming, or maybe I just need to do a better job putting the stuff out there. But everything I'm saying now, I've said at least a dozen times on stream, and written quite a few analyses on this. No, I need a little bit more details, because when you say what's the study you're looking at, I need to know exactly what you're referencing. But the new numbers were released yesterday by the Ministry of Health, or 2 days ago from the Ministry of Health. So that's the numbers we were currently looking at and addressing. Oh, and when it comes to those numbers, another thing that people pointed to was that 44% of those killed were men, which is higher than their share of the population. But in most other conflicts, men are the majority of those killed, right? So for example, if you look at Syria, 70% of civilians killed in Syria were men. And if you include combatants, over 90% of those killed in Syria were men. So in Gaza, it's significantly less. And I actually haven't found an actual war that had minority of those being killed men. This is the first instance. And that's why, as I said earlier, it's not quite a traditional war. The numbers aren't as bad as what we generally call genocides, but it's definitely not in line with wars. Okay, we need to back up a little bit. You go, I'm not relying on Gaza Ministry of Health. So this is a big so there's a big misconception. The Ministry of Health every few months releases data to the public. These are names and ID numbers. All these names and ID numbers exist in the Palestinian Population Registry, which Israel has full access to. We have a very unique situation where one party has access to the population registry of another party, not allowing for either side to really fabricate all too much. So it actually keeps both parties in check when it comes to their Gaza casualty reporting. You say you're not relying on Ministry of Health data, but Israel themselves don't deny this data. It's only these online keyboard warriors that are putting out these BS analyses saying that they can't be trusted. Israel does not refute it, for good reason. Israel can review it. And it doesn't require anyone more than a low-level bureaucrat at the Ministry of Interior to do this check. It's very easy to check if the list is fabricated. The reason why Israel does not contest the numbers is because Israel knows that they're real. So these lists that they release every few months is an excellent basis for understanding casualty. At least for understanding minimum, right? Because we don't know who's not yet accounted for, and it doesn't seem like indirect deaths have been added, those dying from malnutrition and the collapse of malnutrition and disease as a result of the collapse of the healthcare system. And the reason we know that indirect deaths likely haven't been added is because indirect deaths largely impact young babies, like 0-year-olds, and very old people. So if indirect deaths were added, you would expect to see some kind of a spike amongst 0-year-olds, and then like 80-plus-year-olds. We don't see those spikes. We also did get a few names of babies who died of hypothermia a few months back. And yesterday, when the new list came out, I checked for all their names in the MOH data and didn't find any of them. So we don't have any reason to believe that indirect deaths are being added. So the MOH data gives us a great basis for understanding minimal casualties. What the maximum is, that's just predictions based on other information we can gather. And yeah, then Poppy says that they have provided accurate figures in previous conflicts. They have. They've actually never. These lists that they release every few months have never been found to be fabricated or fake. Never, not once. People have written full think tank analyses. Again, Andrew Fox and the Henry Jackson Society put out one of the biggest shams of a report I've ever seen. And actually, let me drop this, because this at the time, not anymore, once I got a little bit more active on Twitter, but at the time, this was my most popular tweet, and it was debunking Andrew Fox's analysis. And this got, a few 100,000 impressions. Nobody who was part of that analysis ever gave a single rebuttal to my debunking. Now, I know if anybody ever called me a liar publicly, I would do what I can to refute that. That is, unless they were right and I lied, and then I would just ignore it. But yeah, they never respond to this. It goes point by point and shows just how intellectually dishonest of a report that was. And what was troubling was how much of the mainstream media picked it up and reported on it as if it was truth, never to make a correction. I haven't forgotten that. One day I will address this. My copy and paste stopped working. I can't even. That's so weird. I literally can't copy and paste this. Do we have any Mac people out there that might have insight as to what the hell's going on? Wait, ITS is saying IDF no longer agree with the numbers of the Gaza Ministry because it might be wrong because they destroyed the healthcare system, Hagari said. But all that would point to underreporting, not overreporting. Not to mention Hagari is one of the bigger liars. But you could share. Feel free to share a link. We could read what he said. Noam says, I've been hacked by the Trump administration, potentially, but I am a citizen, so that wouldn't be a good precedent to go after a citizen. Huh. Maybe it's... Okay, maybe I need a refresh, but I'm not going to do that now. Well, whoever wants to see this analysis, you can message me and I will send it to you, or the debunking that I've done. Yeah, ITS, I am interested. If you could send me what Hagari said. But again, saying we don't know if we could trust him because the healthcare system, he's not indicating that he thinks it's, that's like how Hagari does it, these vague things that obfuscate but don't really mean much. So I would want to read the quote, but it sounds like him saying that we don't know if they're legit because the healthcare system's been destroyed. People can interpret that as, oh, they could be faking the numbers, but essentially what he's saying is they might not have full reporting capacity and there's an undercount. Yeah. How do you message me? You could see in the description, there's links, my personal links, and then you see my Twitter, Instagram, Facebook even. You can see all that stuff. So Milo is asking, where's the Ministry of Health and what is left of Gaza? Well, they are in all the hospitals, right? So doctors report, they have a system. Doctors are reporting violent deaths in the system. That's like how the reporting currently is done. There was a time in April 2024 where their systems went down. They released a very list with a lot of missing data because their systems were down. But since then, the systems have been restored. And they've also come up with different ways to collect data that are untraditional. So they used to be a body gets to the morgue, it's reported, it gets added to the list. Now, because a lot of bodies are actually not even being brought to the hospital, right? If a family member is killed in an airstrike, why bring them to the hospital? You might just bury them in your backyard. The hospitals are overcrowded, overcapacity. So they have a family reporting system where you can report on the death of a loved one, right? So that's another means that they're collecting data. But yeah, where's their facility? Do they have an office? Yeah, I think they do. There was where did I see this photo? A photo released a few weeks ago of them sitting in a room that seemed like the Ministry of Health offices, but I don't know exactly where they're located. But we do need to recognize the challenge of reporting so many deaths with the constraints they're currently under. Like they deserve a lot more credit than they get credit for. Like they're often painted as this sinister organization just controlled by Hamas trying to manipulate the West, but that's not what the track record shows. They've worked very hard to be able to provide reliable data to the public, and so far, despite being under immense public scrutiny, have not been found to be fudging the numbers as as many are claiming. There has been, I found one single instance. Now let's just give a little bit more clarity. And in 2 minutes we got to run because we have Peter Beinart joining us on Discord. But there's two organizations reporting data out of Gaza. There's the Gaza Ministry of Health, and then there's the Gaza Media Office. The Gaza Media Office what they say should be taken with a grain of salt. They don't release verifiable data, and their numbers are quite different than Hamas. Do you all remember? Sorry, they are quite different from the Ministry of Health. Do you all remember the UN? This was like a year ago. The UN changed their reporting. They changed their numbers, the percentage of women and children killed, and then everybody said, "You see, the Ministry of Health made a change." That's not what happened. What happened was the UN was relying on GMO data, and then they switched to MOH data because they understood it to be more reliable. The MOH didn't change their way of reporting. The UN changed their way of reporting. Then people just blamed that on the reliability of the MOH. But there was a time in the months after October 7th that the GMO was releasing these daily casualty graphics that the MOH was also reposting. So I did find one instance of the MOH doing a daily report that they took from the GMO, which was then confirmed to not be true. So I'm not even saying, like, the daily reports, we don't really have ways to verify them. When you do add up every daily report the MOH makes, it does correspond with the totals they're putting out. But the only verifiable data is this list they released every few months. And again, that's verifiable because it's a public list. Israel could very easily verify it. If there was any problem in the data, we wouldn't need Andrew Fox and John Spencer to talk about it. Israel would let us know. Israel would be the first to tell us that there's problems in the data, but they're not. It's these keyboard warriors that are doing it. Okay, last question. This is a good question because this is another claim being made by those same people. Does the Ministry of Health report natural causes of death in their numbers? Most likely not. And if they are, it's only some of them, right? And the reason I say most likely not is this is something that is impossible to know entirely. The reason we know that most natural deaths aren't being added is for the same reason we know indirect deaths aren't being added, is because natural deaths are primarily 70 plus or under 1. So if natural deaths were being added, you'd see a spike in the under 1 group and in the 70 plus group. You don't see those spikes. What is possible, and again, we don't have any evidence of this happening, but what is possible that they're carefully adding natural deaths that correspond with the population pyramid to not create any unusual spikes. It's quite conspiratorial, but I'm saying it's possible because, we have no way to know if they're doing this or not. But that would only account for a minority of natural deaths, which wouldn't significantly change the data. So they don't even have real incentive to do that. So we know for certain that the majority of natural deaths and the majority of indirect deaths are not, and it's likely that they're not being added at all. Cool. I see we have Adam Becker here saying, starting the chat with Peter. Yes. And it will be Adam actually who will be interviewing him. Now, I want to drop a link to Discord, but I don't think I could copy it. So Adam, can you drop a link to the Discord? You could also see it in the description of this video. It says join the after party, and then there's a link there. And if somebody else can drop a link, that'd be great for the chat. Once you join, on the left-hand side, you will see it says speaking with Peter Beinart. Click there and you will be connected. Love to see you there. Thank you all for joining. This was an awesome session. I'll be back for a stream next week. Signing off.